Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, welcome to Norway House. And welcome to yet another seminar that we are so pleased to host, put up by Richard and his excellent organizations. To me, when I think of your organization, I think of someone who is trying to solve the Gordic knot. Merge worlds that very often are somewhat skeptical. I am the brother-in-law of a scientist, and he said, no, don't bother me with it. This is commercial stuff. I'm a serious scientist. But then we know, unless we're able to spin off from technological innovation, we will not succeed to the extent that we need to when it comes to jobs, growth, and investment. And believe me, people, in Brussels, that's what everybody is talking about. In the big building on the other side of the street, we have the best location in Brussels, and they have the second best location. It's all about jobs, growth, and investment. As a layman, I very often heard that it's too complicated in Europe. It's much easier in the US. The Americans are, quicker to taking scientific innovation to the marketplace. We have a more, let's say, complex structure in Europe, but there are huge investments in Europe. In the Horizon 2020 European research area, we have massive structures. Although not being a member of the European Union, Norway participates fully in everything. We follow the Sinatra doctrine, the My Way version of it. You will probably have noticed that these are not fully normal times in terms of security. And I'm very pleased that we were able to have almost a full house, despite that there are two or four scary guys outside protecting us. So I'm extremely happy on behalf of Norway and Norway House to host yet another seminar on the key question. Open science to open innovation, because that's really what it's all about. And may I add as a footnote, I'm particularly pleased that we have a Norwegian spin-off, which you will hear later on, that will illustrate how you can take a spin-off from what I was saying here is, to me, a core scientific, massive framework on the outside of Geneva. So, Richard, again, to all of you, welcome. I leave the rest of the proceedings to you in the best of hands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Again, many thanks. We are delighted to be back at Norway House with you. We're also delighted to be joined online with an audience who is able to tweet in on what we're doing. You'll probably see it on your screens, but the hashtag, and I've pointed out to the audience, in case you'd rather tweet rather than ask a question here, is two of them. You take your choice. Hashtag Open Science or hashtag Norway House. The reason why we are doing this online is because the topic today is extremely important, we think, for the future of both science in Europe and for the economy. And that's the key point that we're addressing here. What is the relationship between science and the economy overall? Why do we spend money on science? Why spend money on research infrastructure, which is a particularly expensive form of science? Now, as you'll see in the course of this conference, we've got a plenitude of reasons that we're going to give you as to why this is. But this is a debate that we're having ultimately on the purpose of it. We will be joined, in addition, by our distinguished panel, and there are three panels coming up to discuss different aspects of it. We will be joined from California, from Berkeley, by Henry Chesborough, who is the man who coined the term open innovation. He is now a professor also at ESADE in Barcelona, but at the moment he's in California. He's just published a paper, which you'll find in your book, on this subject of the conference, from open science to open innovation. How do you connect the two? We'll also get a presentation from Sergio Bertolucci, the research director for CERN, on an initiative that they've got in particular with several other partners of the Aeroforum group of research infrastructure, and discussion with you. The first thing is this, which is in your pack and online. You can find it there if you're watching online. Big science, what's its worth? As a group of journalists, we decided that we would simply try to get an answer to that question in the only way we know how, which is to ask a bunch of other people, because of course we couldn't think of it ourselves. We looked through all of the literature that's been published, the economic literature that we could find, and tried to put together a compendium of what economists have been saying for some years about the value of investment in science generally and research infrastructure in particular. I'll just mention a few things from it. There's some really striking numbers here. One is a study that was done by the Battelle Institute, for instance, on the impact of the Human Genome Project. This was the big American government program, began in the early 90s, that produced, well, the first map of the human genome and many things beyond. Their estimate was that for every dollar invested in that project by the US government, the return to the economy was $141. That's an astonishing multiple. There was a study by the Kauffman Foundation in the US. This is research all around the world. They studied just the impact of spinouts from MIT in Boston. They found that there were 25,600 spinouts from MIT, spinout companies, with annual revenue of $2 trillion, which would make MIT the 11th largest economy in the world, if it were a country, which some of you might say it is. There's many other studies that have been done. Here in Europe, there was a study of the Daresbury synchrotron in the UK, which found a return, now the numbers vary, you'll see, a return of 2 to 3 times on the amount invested by the government, the return to the economy, that is. There was a study also in Europe on what's the value of physics-based industries that was counted by the Center for Economics and Business Research. That resulted in an estimate of 3.8 trillion in turnover. I mean, look, these numbers are all over the map. Can we believe them? Well, if you look through the studies, you see that every one of them has got a different methodology, a different funding source, very important to keep in mind. I mean, the numbers from NASA, for instance, in the US are extraordinary, but they're every year in front of Congress having to justify their budget, so you have to ask about this. The conclusion from the research that we did was that everybody who's looked at it agrees there is a strong economic benefit for investment in science. We know this anecdotally. I mean, you get 5 of the top 20 drugs in the world were developed with the help of synchrotrons. The most, cochlear implants for hearing loss, the memory foam pillows, dental lasers, many other things that came as spin-out from pure science projects, what seemed to be pure science. The most famous, of course, is HTML. which came from ultimately our friends at CERN who are with us today. This was not part of their official research projects, but there was a Brit there, Tim Berners-Lee, who came up with the protocol that started everything off that we now know it's the value of. So anecdotally, we know that investment in science and investment in research infrastructure is really important to the economy. How important is the question? And how do you get it to be more important? That's what we're talking about today. The one policy suggestion that I would have as a humble journalist is simply to say, can't somebody launch a proper economic study of the value of science and of research infrastructure? Countless debates in so many capitals to justify the budget. You would have thought by now that the economics profession would have got a handle on it. So that's my only policy conclusion myself. But we are now going to talk about specifically how do you get more value out of the research infrastructure and research generally. And for that, I'm delighted to be joined here by, first off, on my far right, Jan van den Biesen, Vice President at Philips Research. Beside him is Augusto Bergoglio from the European Commission, DG Connect, Digital Information Society. Thank you very much for joining us. Beside him, Maria Lepton, the Director of the European Molecular Biology Organization. Thank you very much for joining us. And Carlo Rizzuto, who has had many hats over the years, including former chairman of ESFRI, which is the how do you describe it? The body that actually provides guidance to the Commission on what are the most important research infrastructure projects. And you are currently with another one, the Central European Research Infrastructure Consortium. So thank you very much for joining us. Now, let me ask you, it's the most obvious question. You heard what I was just saying about the apples and oranges nature of the current literature, but give me a reason. Why do we fund science? Jan, you're Philip, you're a company. Why do you care?
As companies, we see 5 reasons, I think. Science for the sake of science, but also to feed future innovation. But then keep in mind that to convert scientific results into successful products in the marketplace requires huge additional investments. So that's science for science. There is science for education, and that also goes for research infrastructure. It is a great training ground. I'm a physicist myself originally. There's science for policy. See the debate currently still going on here in Europe, here in Brussels, on the chief scientific advisor, whether there should be one or not, or multiple. Science for society, that we also see in Horizon 2020. The science has a lot to contribute to addressing the societal challenges, with industry in the role of converting the results into innovative products and services, and science for competitiveness to feed innovation and expand our technological competences through applied research. And that, in turn, later on, will give rise to economic growth and jobs.
So basically you're saying that the science contributes to the political environment, to the several framework and environmental issues. But come on, how do you justify that to shareholders of Philips? Why should you be a vice president of research?
That's it. Certainly, if we're talking about basic science, that is a difficult issue indeed, because companies owe it to their shareholders to only invest in something where they can expect a return on investment that exceeds their cost of capital. That's a ground rule for business. Now, the problem with basic science, basic research is that, by definition, according to the OECD, basic research does not have any application or use in view. So that makes a difficult story within the company. In addition, it is highly risky, and it takes an incredible amount of time before it gives rise to something tangible for business or not. You don't know. So basic science is very difficult for companies to invest in. So as you will see, many
so
companies...
the public sector should do the investment then?
It is, exactly, that's the point.
Augusto
Basic
is smiling
science
here. Yeah.
has all the characteristics of a public good, and
Yeah.
therefore you cannot expect the business sector to carry the burden.
But it must happen for
But
the
it must
economy
happen
overall. Yeah.
for society and economy at large.
Okay, all right. Maria, come specifically to your field, biology, then. Okay, I can see the importance of pharmaceuticals for the economy. So is that the whole story about why we care about biological research?
Of course not. I mean, I do want to, I know this is not what today's meeting is about, but I do want to make this point also because it relates to what Jan said. There are other reasons than economic reasons for funding science. Man is and I include women in that, is an explorer. Nobody asked why we're going to North Pole, South Pole, and Moon. We, by nature, do exploration. And a lot comes out of that eventually. But the sense is that we do exploration blindly. And that cannot be funded by companies. Obviously not. It's also a cultural activity. And just as we can't, we don't ask what we get out of a prima ballerina dancing Swan Lake or Anne-Sophie Mutter playing John Sibelius violin concerto. We don't ask that. We just do it. So it is a cultural activity. It's something we do and we want to do. And children are interested in it. So with that, that is, of course, something that companies can't pay for. That's what that's what public funding has to pay for. And it's hugely rewarded, both intellectually and by the economic consequences. You yourself mentioned the pharmaceutical industry, massive rewards, but that can't be paid for by the companies. So we have to rely on public funding to continue to fund that.
But why? The largest civilian research program in the world is in healthcare, in the US, the National Institutes of Health. I think it's $38 billion a year they spend, which, sorry, it dwarfs all of Horizon 2020. Why is funding public funding in Europe for healthcare so much less?
Well, I mean, if you add, we can't just compare it with Horizon 2020.
I should have said
we have
healthcare
lots
research.
of, we have lots of national science funding programs that actually are very generous. And I actually think the multitude of funding options in Europe are potentially very positive. So it's very good that we have both both Horizon 2020, including the ERC, which is, of course, an elite program, and our national funding programs, and things like EMBO that fund postdocs and training. So I don't think we're doing so badly in the actual funding, and we're doing fantastic research in Europe. You know that, we all know that. So if we want to do the comparison between US and Europe, I think we're asking completely different things. We're asking risk, which you mentioned, where Europe is incredibly conservative still, constantly asking, and I'm a little bit worried we're asking this here too, what's the immediate benefit? And if you don't see immediate benefit, it's too risky, we can't possibly do it. So I would plead for a more open mind and funding the best and funding them freely and letting the reins loose, not always asking what's the next step. Just as you've said that companies can't do it, public funding can do it, and something will come out of it. There are more than enough examples for that.
Okay, Augusto, that kind of provides a segue to you. I mean, you're always in the position, you're in the Commission. Why should public money be spent on this?
So now that the case for science has been established by my two colleagues, we can think about how we do science. That's the question. And the case of research infrastructures come into place, and that is indeed the role that I play from the perspective of research, digital research infrastructures, and the public sector contributes obviously with financial contributions. So the driver is what the researchers need to do research, what the researchers need to do science. And what we observe, and it's a well-known fact, is that science is becoming really data-driven. Researchers are adapting their methods based on exploitation and analysis of data, simulation, and so on and so forth, which obviously requires the necessary IT equipment, to perform science. And given that, in principle, there is no much interest from the private sector to invest on that infrastructure, perhaps because there are no immediate returns, obviously, public sector has to come in and provide the means for the researchers.
No immediate returns? I mean, the richest companies in the world are in the IT sector. The most profitable company in the world is in the IT sector.
I know, but the question is, why would they invest on an infrastructure that is going to be used by researchers for free, or not necessarily for a fee that would justify their investment? This is a huge debate. Some people even think that public means like the ones we provide should be also offered for a fee. For the time being, we provide this infrastructure for free. But the question is out there, of course.
Yeah, yeah. Before,
actually, actually, this is very much part of open innovation. When 10 years ago, Henry Chesbrough, in 2003, brought out his book that was just mentioned. We decided, triggered by that book, to open up our premises to third parties.
Oh, Henry's in California smiling right now.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. It was really triggered by that book, so we decided to also open up our private research infrastructure to third-party users. And I think we have some 200 users, companies and institutes using our stuff. But it's not easy. It is not trivial.
And they probably use it for things that you are interested in, not necessarily only to their own interest.
Bonjour. Bienvenue au
of
service.
course, for the interest for us is that the external users help carry the burden of investing, allowing us to keep it state of the art, so that also our researchers have access to research infrastructures that otherwise we could not afford.
Yes. Okay. Let me stop you there for a minute, because I want to pull it to a specific case. Carlo, you used to run the synchrotron in Trieste. Yes. And I think you did some research on the economic value of the synchrotron.
Well, the point is that you have, I mean, the explanation of why you have to fund research and the research infrastructures has many sides, and you have to use the right side with the right person. And the right person depends on the cycle that this person has in mind. The politician has a 3-year cycle, in Italy 3-month cycle. The industry, if it's a shareholders industry, has a 1-year cycle, I mean cannot be much longer. If you are in the States, luckily they have 5-year cycles in government, and the European government has a 7-year cycle. So at this point, the explanation that you have to use is to take into account what is the return cycle of the party to which you are speaking. So if you try to demonstrate that research has a 1-year cycle, you are totally wrong. Does not have. We know by economists that have been studying that the research has a 7-year cycle for innovation, not shorter. It is very rare that there is a shorter cycle. And then at this point, you have really to argue on the basis of the response that you expect. What is definitely sure is that, and I think this was said a couple of centuries ago, research will produce income for tax authorities, but not immediately. Will produce a large income, and it is producing enough income so that the framework program can be funded. Definitely. So at this point, this is the general base. Then you have really to try to see what is, go inside the laboratories, whichever is the laboratory, or inside the research enterprise, and look how is the cycle between producing new knowledge, producing new technology, and the cycle between discovery and invention. Mm-hmm. This is very different in different sides of science. In biology, it's very fast in this moment. So discoveries and inventions come very quickly, one after the other. In chemistry, it was very quick in the beginning of last century. You were discovering because you were inventing new processes continuously. And the new processes had an industrial outcome right away. In electronics and software, there is a very strong cycle still between discovery and invention. You can invent something if you want to you must invent something if you want to discover something. And therefore, this is an asset for industry, can be an asset for industry. There are other industries like the pharmaceutical industry in which, unfortunately, the cycle is longer. You have to invent thousands of molecules before you find one which is useful. And this is, again, something that you have to explain to the shareholders in a different way and to the funders in a different way.
Okay, so that's the general case that you're making. I'll drag you back to Trieste.
Yeah. Oh, back to Trieste, then when depends. If I had to explain to the local politicians, in the beginning was very difficult because I had a Nobel Prize that had convinced them that there would be truckloads of photons coming out of the synchrotron, which you could sell by the kilo. And the claim was that this could self-fund itself by 50%. I don't say what is the name of the Nobel Prize, but it was a Nobel Prize, and it was believed. So to cancel this information and translate it into the right information, I had to show a few years later that the village of Basovica, where the synchrotron is built, which was next to the Iron Curtain, was closed, could not be used as a way in because there was the closed Iron Curtain. Within 10 years, now is hosting 3 hotels, 15 restaurants, all the houses have been repainted, and the shops are booming because of the scientific tourism of the users of the synchrotron. So in the local environment, I could explain that there was a positive effect, nothing to do with science. It's the so-called Barak effect. I mean, if you have enough people going in and out, you have an economic effect. Then there was a second wave, and with a telephone company that they were producing telephones. They took off away from us all the technicians because it was the easiest way to get technical trained technicians, and the firm could boom for a while, not for very long. I think there was a fire in a provider of chips that made out this company. I don't know where it was.
So then there's the
maybe it was not Philips.
So then there's the secondary effect.
This was a secondary effect.
Right.
And then there is a third effect in the end, which interests also the government, the Italian government at this point more than the local government, which is again the effect of driving the quality of the university users by direct competition within the infrastructure.
Okay.
So by measuring the quality of research, it is clear that those disciplines that are using research infrastructures have a direct benchmark at international level.
All right. So then that's
so there are different.
That's one particular case study. Yeah. Maria, could I come to you? Is there an example that you particularly like of economic spin-out from molecular biology work?
Well, there's so many, but I mean, right now there's one that's going on at this very moment, where I think at least 3 or 4 companies have been founded, each funded by, I think the one in the US, 43 million venture capital, who are exploiting, who've beginning to get patents on a technique called CRISPR-Cas, which is only 2 years old, which will allow genome editing. It's completely crazy, it's completely futuristic. It allows people to really change genomes of animals, and it works in all animals and plants, unlike previous techniques. And it comes completely from the lab. It was completely government funded, basic science, and that's just, it's going to boom. They're expecting billion-dollar economies. So just watch that space. It's really not yet been widely reported.
What are the things that could come from this? I mean, help me imagine.
Well, lots of stuff that's unpopular among many, at least in my country in Germany. Massive genome editing. You know, we've talked about genetically modified organisms. People are scared of them because they have foreign genes. Yeah. You can now change organisms in such a way that there's no foreign gene left in there. And you can do it in a much more directed way. Together with stem cells, it's you know, the potential is huge because this technique works on human cells as well. So it's just, it's an example for the future, but we have
And where is this happening, this research?
This was happening, some of it was actually, it comes from figuring out how bacteria withstand viruses, you know, something that nobody in industry was interested in, except Danisco, actually, because if the bacteria that make the yogurt are infected by the wrong virus, then the yogurt doesn't work. And so part of it was actually discovered in Danisco, where they were doing basic research on how to protect their
So an interesting connection there with companies.
But that was part. The rest was by a young woman who started out, I think, in Austria, went to Sweden, is now in Hanover, Emmanuelle Charpentier, and another scientist at Berkeley, I believe, Jennifer Doudna, and these two women together worked out this technique 2 or 3 years ago. The basis of it in bacteria was known 10 years ago.
So clearly,
incredibly rapid, and it's going to have a multi-billion-dollar effect.
So clearly, that Battelle report that I cited about a multiplier of 141, that's not impossible.
No, that's not impossible. It'll be that for this.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, Augusto, but then, so what's a particularly good example that you like of economically valuable stuff that has come from CERN?
From the specific, I mean, I would like to make just a remark regarding the specific area where I'm responsible for, which is networking, distributed computing, high-performance computing. And there is a piece of anecdotal evidence which says that 80% of the funding that goes to those infrastructures is to pay for salaries, which is an interesting observation. And this is particularly relevant in domains related to data, data curation, scientific data curation, and the rest. So when we think about spin-outs of or spin-offs of research, one has to think, first of all, about the human capital you are building through your funding, because if 80% goes to pay for salaries, that means that people can really learn and acquire expertise. And then, you know, that people will eventually go away or merge or do other things and benefit society overall in ways that are absolutely impossible to trace. So that would be the remark I would like to say, because it's we always look for traceability. In particular, we in the Commission, we are very interested in knowing, you know, which are the specific results from our specific projects, the projects that we funded. But there is a more general phenomenon, I would say, that is very, very important. Regarding the major achievements, I think there's been one major one, although the economic effect from the infrastructure that we fund, and Sergio is of course very familiar with it, because the discovery, I mean the proof of the existence of the Higgs boson was possible thanks to the infrastructure that we fund. So we'll see if in the future.
So your DG is taking credit now for this.
We are not taking credit because we are not funding all. It's as I always say, 99% funded by member states. We just fund the 1% needed to make it work.
That matters.
Yeah, no, to make it work altogether. But it's clear that without that infrastructure, that specific discovery would not have been possible.
Okay, Jan, could I come to you? So, what's a particularly salient example of spin-out that you're familiar with?
Without going to the results of 30 years of framework programs, I rather... You could? I could, but to be brief, Richard wants us to be brief, that would be very long. Now, let's do that first.
All right, buckle your seatbelts here. All right.
No, there's one general point about 30 years of framework programs, because actually it was in 1984 that the then commissioner Davignon called together 12 companies to Brussels to say, hey, we should do something in Europe, not only on nuclear research, but also on industrial research. That gave rise to ESPRI, the first program that was later joined by RACE and Bright URAM, and in hindsight was called the first framework program. Now we have completed 7 framework programs, and that means that in Europe we have a fantastic fabric of collaboration. You can call any colleague in any company or any institute or university in Europe and say, hey, we would like to collaborate with you on that and that topic, and let's use the next call of Horizon 2020, whatever, or Eureka, something, and then people know what you're talking about, and the rules of the game are clear, and that is a huge asset for Europe that we should really value. And I think the Commission could celebrate a little bit more the existence of this.
And if I could add just a specific example, I mean, everybody carrying a mobile phone here should be thankful to Davignon, because he was the one who promoted this industrial research, and thanks to that we have the GSM, for example, on the mobile phone. So that's you can subscribe to this, I suppose.
Absolutely.
That's a go back to
so of course, so next you're going to be claiming credit for invention of automobiles, planes. You know,
I promise I will not say anything.
Oh, yes.
By the way, 30 years ago I was still in kindergarten, so.
Actually, I participated in the first framework program as a researcher.
You see?
And ESPRI.
There you are.
Okay, but okay, it's the collaborative network that is formed.
But to then to also present something tangible, talking about research infrastructure and maybe CERN in particular, there are of course some very relevant aspects for companies like ours that are in medical imaging, in detectors, in imaging technologies, but also in data analytics. We see a lot of interesting things happening at CERN that are certainly worthwhile also for us.
Okay.
And yeah, maybe later on we can be more specific.
Well, I mean, is there a specific example now you're thinking?
There are detector technologies that started at CERN that have been transposed for our purposes in flat panel detectors for our medical imaging equipment that really stem from CERN research. Similarly, there are multipliers, signal multipliers, also coming from CERN, and a very interesting one that's upcoming. That is the what's it called? The Medipix project that has been going on for several iterations and how do you say that? Various periods, but that is now progressing to potentially spectral imaging, and that would be very interesting because it would allow us basically to make the step, comparing it to photography, from black and white X-rays or black and white photography to color pictures, and that would allow us to make the distinction between various tissues. So that would be a real breakthrough, and yeah, we are really looking at what's happening in CERN there.
Okay, all right, okay. So, Maria, you wanted to add something?
I just wanted a little bit. I just wanted to break a lance for future infrastructures. We're talking, of course, about the big ones, CERN and the synchrotrons. I think things are changing a little bit. We've got those, they're wonderful. We've also got big biology research labs. Data has been mentioned a lot, and I think what's becoming necessary is to look much more into dispersed infrastructures, and that includes those that deal with data. They have to be, they should be across Europe, and I think Europe has to think very hard about how to enable that. And especially with data sharing, it's becoming extremely important in medical research and in diagnosis and therapy. You've heard about personalized medicine. That will require a dispersed infrastructure throughout all European countries that probably no country alone can stem. So I think that's something where we also should look at in the future. That
okay,
is
so
something.
then that's an example, and then a way to get more value out of this.
That is,
process.
you can only get value out of all the data that we have if we have efficient sharing mechanisms, and that requires an expensive and top high quality cutting edge dispersed infrastructure.
Are there other ways that we could get more economic value out of the research infrastructure that we have? And then we take a few questions from you. Go ahead.
Well, the other way that was, we started in this direction, but then we stopped these, the spin-off companies. The spin-off companies have two sides to it. It's rare that a researcher is also a good entrepreneur, but at least 10% of the researchers have entrepreneurial spirit. The only problem is to try to help them to get out of research, to detach them, to go and become entrepreneurs. I have generated some 25 spin-off companies, and in every case, it was the case of the researcher who could be convinced that becoming an entrepreneur was not a failure. In Europe, we have this idea that if you stay on in the job and grow up to become vice president or whatever, you are successful. But there are many other ways to become successful, is also to go out. And this is the thing that is easier in the States than in Europe. I mean, the mobility. Mm-hmm. So I think that one thing that should be done more is to increase the human mobility between different institutions. There is another part that is the support by venture capital or support by people who have been already in business. And again, the fiscal frame in Europe is not the best. And here we have a lot of work to do to make it easier for a rich individual to bet, not to play in the casino, but to bet on a new enterprise. Mm. This is very difficult still. Okay, yeah. So I think that these are the bottlenecks.
The thing that you mentioned about stepping out, actually you could even...
I'm kidding, of course.
No, having been trained as have a PhD in physics, then going to a company is also frowned upon by the real scientists. Yes. So yes. Already that is a step. Yes. But stepping out and really becoming an entrepreneur, that is indeed a next hurdle. And that is why I think it's good that we now have a new instrument in Europe in the form of the EIT, which tries to bring together research, innovation, and business, in particular entrepreneurship. So yeah, it has taken a while to get it up and running, but yeah, we are involved in a couple of the kicks. And since about 2 years or so, I think we can say it is really adding something that was not existing in the previous framework program, a new way of working with this focus on entrepreneurship.
Okay, all right.
Still a long way to go.
At this point, let me take a few questions, all right, from you. First off, are there any questions on Twitter? Yeah? Okay, Florence Zabasco. What is happening?
Yeah, so we have a question to the panel.
Okay.
How can you maximize economic benefit without losing scientific integrity?
Okay. Anybody want to take that one? Thank you for that question. All right.
There is a counter question. What is scientific integrity?
Wait a minute. You're supposed to know that, Carlo. Who wants to answer?
I just have an anecdote. In spring of last year, I was at a conference in Athens, and I think Shiva was there too from the EIB. And at the conference dinner, I was sitting next to the State Secretary of Latvia for Science and Education. And much to my surprise, on the other side of her was sitting the Latvian Deputy Secretary, State Secretary for Economic Affairs. And the secret was that they were married. They managed to reconcile the two. And I presume in full integrity.
I was making the point about integrity because it can be interpreted in a Taliban way or in many other ways. I mean, for example, in physics in Italy, it was forbidden for a while to interact with industry because of the shock of having been involved in the Manhattan Project. So there were a number of physicists, an entire generation of physicists coming with Amaldi and the Fermi boys and so on, who did not want to hear anything about interacting with industry. So this could be taken as integrity or taken as a backlash. So it was an interesting experience. It was very difficult for a physicist in Italy to start interacting with industry. Luckily, in my case, the case happened that I was very active in 1968. So I was not allowed to re-enter the physics faculty. I had to go in engineering, and all my best students went to industry. So this is one way in which I broke the integrity barrier, which was over there. So I mean,
I find this an interesting question because I can't remember the exact wording of the question, but there seemed to be sort of research integrity on the one side and economics and application on the other. I don't see why these have to be different. Of course, scientists should not prostitute themselves for some big economic gain. Nobody should.
Well,
so I don't.
Big enough.
Okay.
Well, there's a scandal in that going on right now at Harvard. So yeah.
Yes, of course. But to make that a general question, I think to look at the fringe of people who behave without integrity for an economic gain doesn't help the discussion here. I think one has to have both. Obviously, you can contribute to an economic application of science while maintaining integrity of basic and pure research.
Okay.
I don't know whether that answers maybe the questioner wants to rephrase their question, but I just think one has to be very careful about pretending that those are not compatible.
Okay, another question? Yeah.
Hello, how do you do? Professor Linson from the MNRC Newport Network. There was a mention of security just before this workshop. And I'm wondering, what's the finality of innovation? What's the finality of education? What's the finality of research? To our mind, seems to me it should be a means to defuse the world-ticking time bomb that is threatening our civilization and humanity, and perhaps also to achieve and sustain the citizens' well-being, quality of life. There was a mention of education. I often say that, well, I mean, the issues we are faced with today have reached such a level of complexity that experts, academics, politicians, and the audience are getting completely out of their depth. Why? Because they are faced with integrated interdisciplinary challenges, something that their education does not prepare them for. The existing educational system is not sufficiently powerful to enable us to deal with the complexities of the challenges we are faced with. We must turn to the education of tomorrow. And there was a mention of the EIT regarding education. Well, the EIT, I think that some people know what I think of the EIT. I'd like to remind that Euroscience, Foresight, and the EIT are initiatives that were directly inspired from our work without the slightest economic recognition, in complete violation of intellectual property rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, but the question is, you're saying that is there a broader purpose for scientific research than simply the money or the science itself? So, yeah.
Well, in a sense, as it was very clearly stated in the beginning, if you speak of research and not of development, as two different things, research is always somehow driven by curiosity. I mean, you want to trigger the truth, or you want to understand more, or you want to know more. And of course, you want to know more of something which is not known. So it's completely open. I mean, it's completely unpredictable what you get out of research. Of course, if you are curious enough, you develop methods, instruments, or approaches which are continuously new, based on existing knowledge, to twiggle more out of the unknown. So this is what is the, let's say, technological or the impact of research, the most immediate impact of research, because you keep on discovering technologies. Now, to say that you are making research because you would like to decrease the risks that humanity has, probably is not completely true. I mean, you want to use what the research has already produced to concoct ways in which you decrease the risks. But by trying to have new knowledge, you don't decrease the risks. Actually, you may increase the risks.
Okay. Let's draw a line right there. We'll be coming back for discussion. There are more panels where we will be looking at other aspects of this. But thank you very much.